All right, so let's officially begin this talk, this presentation. I asked the board of the Mindfulness Society, do you want me um, to just speak like I often or normally do, where I don't have anything planned, but I just sometimes have a topic, and we decided on a topic as we always do at the Mindfulness Society. So should I just have a topic if I can speak from there, or should I do a PowerPoint? And PowerPoint was voted in as the preferred method for today. So here we go. It was usually just for my topics, I just intuitively say, okay, what should I talk about? And then something usually comes to me and I just write that down and that's what I'm going to talk about. And I don't usually give it all that much thought. It might have been something percolating recently, but I don't really give it all that much thought. And I just sort of trust and say, that sounds like a good thing to talk about at this point and write it down and then do it. This one, admittedly, is very, very difficult to put together a list and an explanation. And I think the reason why I found it very difficult it was very easy to come up with the topic, very easily to do the work, very difficult to do the work to present this for you. And I think why is because there are so many spiritual teachings that are neglected. So it's hard to make a concise list. And I think another reason is because, in a way, they're all neglected, right? I made a joke with the board when I when they asked for the PowerPoint presentation. I wrote in the group chat, I just wrote the neglected spiritual practices, all of them. The end. Bye. Bye, everybody. There's the presentation. Everything is neglected. When we consider if we consider ourselves somebody who's practicing mindfulness and somebody who's uh, looking to develop the mind and reach the full potential of the mind and such things, then let's take a look at what we do most of the day, right? And we can often say that our day is filled with things that are neglecting the practice, right? Especially when we understand, see now the talk is just coming from from inside, not from the PowerPoint. I promise I'll get there. But especially when considering the fact that, and this is a neglected teaching maybe, the fact that when we do our practices, when we're practicing mindfulness, right? Whenever we stop practicing mindfulness, our development doesn't just stay exactly where it was when we stop, right? It starts to deteriorate, right? Why? Not because mindfulness is mean. It's because everything else that we're doing instead is now becoming the impressions on our mind and our training, right? So if we're learning with mindfulness, I want to build the habit of not getting lost in what I'm seeing, hearing, and thinking for a very long time, right? I want to be able to wake up and have more knowing minds than these lost minds, right? Well, when we stop practicing mindfulness, and I don't just mean the meditation, but I mean if we don't practice mindfulness enough sufficiently during the day, then we're training this mind to be lost, right? And to turn off mindfulness and stuff like that, and encouraging it to be lost far more than we're encouraging it to be mindful, right? So, how much can we expect in the way of results when we're training our mind to be lost and to be interested in things often that cause us more restlessness and more agitation. So, for example, uh, obviously, things like the short attention span scrolling through things and looking through things on our devices, that's something that promotes agitation, quick immediate gratification, agitation again, quick immediate gratification, agitation again, right? So what are we training our mind to do here, right? What are we training our mind to do most? So what happens is, we start building up a momentum with mindfulness and we're training the mind to be mindful. And then we might be, falling, just instead of swimming forward against the current or even treading water, what we start doing is we start like letting the world of lust and defilements push us back the other way. Then we got to start climbing back again, working our way back again. I think there might be a neglected. So I think I can break the neglected teachings primarily into two categories. Okay? There's the category of people don't want to hear it, it's too hard. Right? So the teacher hesitates to talk about some things too often, right? And so they're sort of left behind by the teacher, right? In a lot of ways. And then there's the category of it's not interesting and it's not fun and it may not feel good, right? The stuff that feels good and is fun and interesting, the glamorous stuff, right? That stuff is easy to teach because people want to hear it, they want to have the experiences, right? They want to feel good, they want to be expansive, they want to feel happy, euphoric, and all these things, right? So those are easy to teach. People want to hear them, and then people want to do the practices in general too, have these experiences, right? So I think I've managed, not sure, but I think I've managed to separate it into things that are hard, and then maybe things that are boring are the most neglected practices, right? In a lot of ways, too hard, not just hard to do as a spiritual practice, but hard as a teaching, a spiritual teaching for people to hear or accept. It could deter them, right? It's too hard to understand. And so there's the category of hard in both of those ways, I suppose. Just because it's hard or because it's dull to do and not exciting doesn't mean it's valuable. Doesn't mean it isn't valuable. A lot of these things are extremely valuable, and that's why I have to talk about them, right? I wouldn't have you attend this class and have things that aren't valuable to talk about and to practice, would I? You expect much more of me than that? I think that's where the word neglected comes in, right? So let's get this presentation going. Okay. So the way that I broke it up in the presentation or in the slides here, just very simple slides, and then I'll describe each bullet point, is that first of all, we'll take a look at foundational pieces that are often avoided or neglected that are create the basis for our practice. Right? That we often don't have the right experiences or aren't developing, and it's because we don't have these foundational pieces. We've neglected these foundational pieces. So first one I put, let's see, humility. So we might get very interested in spirituality, or let's just say mindfulness practice. It's true for most spiritual practices, but let's say for mindfulness practice, since this is we're the venue, and we think, oh wow, that's amazing. You can have things like anger and fear and all these things, they come up And the teacher says they come up, and then once they're seen unbiasedly, these things disappear, right? So instead of being caught in our anger and worries and things like that, they can just be seen and then they vanish, right? That is absolutely amazing, right? I want to be somebody who can magically make, negative emotions disappear. Then I can be happy so much more. I can be happy all the time, right? So then this person goes about uh, trying to become this super person who is able to make these things disappear. And then they might get frustrated. Okay, yeah, it disappeared. Okay, now it didn't. Shoot, how do I make it disappear? Right? That's one example of something that is very, very common. And it becomes more about trying to get the experiences, right? Rather than being concerned with our character. Another example is when we begin, and maybe this is more obvious with regards to humility, is when we begin learning the teachings, we often come into the teachings with our head or our intellect filled with other teachings that we've had, because you might get lucky, but we don't often arrive at mindfulness practice, or at least arrive at, let's say, our lineage, where you haven't learned anything before, right? Where you're a completely blank slate. Usually you've learned a lot of things before. And so you come in thinking, okay, I've had a couple of experiences, or at least I've had a lot of readings. I've listened to other teachers. Let's see what this guy has to say, right? And then it sort of becomes like comparative work, right? Like, okay, I like what he's saying there, but there, no, not so sure. I like this. Don't like that. Oh, that's a good part. Maybe I'll try that one. No, this I'm not going to try. Oh, okay, no, okay, what he's saying there makes sense. No, what he's saying there not doesn't make sense. I really like what that other teacher says. Yeah, that's better. Oh, what he's saying here, it kind of reminds me of a quote from that teacher, right? And so when you're listening to teachings that are aimed at developing you, and the intention is really golden to help to improve you and your practice, and get you to experience some of the truths that the practice leads to. It's impossible to get anywhere, right, when we have one foot in here and one foot in there and one foot in here. Right? We have to dedicate ourselves. And so the word humility is what comes up with that for me, because when we're saying, okay, I like this, I don't like that, I'm going to do this, I'm not going to do that, I like what this teacher says about that, who's the boss? Who's the boss in that case, right? You become the boss and the decision maker of what you're going to do and what you're going to practice. What gives you that authority, right? The the beautiful bright mind all day long, right? The never getting sunken into issues. If you're already enlightened, why are you coming to class? Right? You see that? So this the practice requires a tremendous amount of humility, where you realize that, you know what, I might have read some stuff and whatever. I might have had an experience back in 1974 that was cool. I don't know anything. So the humility is something that goes deep, and it's something that often, as we practice more, we realize how much more our teachers understand than we do. We understand how pure and beautiful this path is. Um, and we actually often have more humility as we continue. In fact, as we get more advanced, we get we have more humility. And I think that humility is something that needs to be taught. Um, there are so many reasons. I guess one of the things I should have said at the introduction is that part of what makes this so hard, this is I could just have a on every single one of these bullet points, I could have an entire talk. Right? It's just too much for one class, which I put myself in those corners a lot. So with humility also is, let's go to the next bullet point then, so I don't get too into the humility one, which is morality. Uh, Morality and humility go together in the sense that when we're taught the five precepts in Buddhism, like for example, you're not going to be able to develop in your mindfulness practice if you're also adjacently drinking, if you're, um, mean to people, if you say, if you don't have the sufficient mindfulness to be able to uh, stop your mean or negative words, or being too forthcoming or being confrontational, right? And being harmful in those kinds of ways, trying to call people out on stuff, you should have this, you didn't that, Eh, you have to stop it at least with your mindfulness, you have to be able to stop it at the mouth and not let it come out the mouth, right? It comes up in the head, you get frustrated, or you get offended, or sulky when you got to say something, right? But you stop it before it comes out, right? You need to be able to do that in order to develop in mindfulness. You have to be also uh, not have things like, another very neglected teaching is idle chatter, right? If your idle chatter means talking when there's really no point to the talking, right? So there's a point to talking if somebody's looking dull or bored and you want to raise their spirits, and so you chat about some things just to make them feel better, ask them how they're doing or whatever, right? There's value to chit chat, but you have to make sure that it has value, right? If you're just talking aimlessly, moving from one topic to the other, just boring people, um, where there's no real rhyme or reason, just usually the main reason is just because I can't handle this quiet, right? That's your reason, is like I need noise all the time, so I'm just gonna talk because I want noise, yeah, right? Or just be slave to your own, tangential mind, and not really caring about the people or the person that's in front of you that they want to speak to, or let's give them the respect to listen to what they have to say too, and you're just off. That's immoral in the context of practicing mindfulness as part of our moral training, right? It's actually kind of like harmful to the person that's with you. You're making them upset and frustrated and agitated and not respected, these types of things. So so these go together in the sense that in order to be able to have correct morality, right, that is required, not just, of course, the not cheating, the not killing even insects, these are an absolute given, for a mindfulness practitioner. So in Thailand, it's just accepted with 100% certainty. It's a tougher one, right? These things are kind of hard for a Western mind to accept. Hang on, how could it be that if I kill an insect, that somehow that harms my meditation? And you can't make the connection, right? The fact that you might not be able to make the connection, like not understanding karma, not understanding energy, not understanding uh, agitation and how it works and when it might come in. Not understanding the connection doesn't mean there isn't a connection. And it also leads to being like, that's not having the correct humility. You listen to something from a master and you go, I don't understand it, but that's because I don't know. I don't understand. Right. And so these are some of the foundational pieces required to be able to develop a really beneficial mindfulness practice along the path. Right? But it goes without saying the main moral code, which we've talked about many times also. But I wanted to bring up some of the the smaller details of it, for things that are maybe neglected teachings and neglected practices. So I already mentioned this, valuing character over experiences is something that is neglected. I think that a lot of practitioners are really after the insight experiences, the truly happy experiences, the automatic mindful experiences, which are, also are very vital, but they won't happen or won't happen with enough regularity when we don't have, and certainly without our morality, but also without the humility that I'm discussing. Let me give a personal example or two. When I arrived in Thailand and started practicing Buddhist practices and getting interested in it, um, I was very much more, I got very into it and a lot more involved and got involved in many, many retreats and started to have really beautiful and powerful experiences because I put so much dedication into it. And then I would meet some people that were older than me, and I felt like didn't have as much experiences as me and knowledge as me. And in Thailand, when you are a the teacher, or when you're an elder, people will greet you and respect, give you respect automatically because of the humility that's built into Thai character. And there's like a bow that you'll do to somebody that you respect, right? And the bow is higher, the hands are higher, right? When you reply your bow as the teacher or as the person who is the elder, that your bow is lower, right? But the higher the hands, sort of the more respect for the person that you're talking to, right? So there's a humility aspect going on right away. Now I had trouble, a lot of trouble with humility when I was and especially first arriving at Longpa Promote's temple. Like I came in having so many experiences, is very good at practicing still type meditation. I had some psychic abilities that developed through Reiki and other courses and things. And I thought I was, pretty special. I had trouble even when I would see somebody older than me that clearly didn't, was just lost and didn't know much and whatever, that I would have trouble doing the respectful bow. Like I would feel like they should be bowing more to me than I should be bowing to them, right? Looking upon it now and even talking about it, it feels ugly. Like it feels gross, but I can remember having that feeling like, they're going to respect me now. I know that person, they know me, they're going to respect me, rather than feeling like, oh, there's somebody, there's my elder, and having respect for them. So just an example of uh, how how I've noticed my character change over time through experience and through the practice, right? When we have a lot of experiences, or even just sometimes some of us like one experience that was really good, then we think, okay, I know stuff now, I'm better than others, and then the ego, this strong ego comes up, and we can believe comparatively that we're better than others. And then we can start to neglect things like morality and humility and some of these foundational pieces that then are a springboard for practicing well. So that's one example with for me with regards to how I know, but there are many examples where I know that I'm such a better person because of people telling me that I am. Um, at the temples, than they thought I used to be. And when I look back, I feel like I used to have so many more firework type experiences because I was involved in so much energy work and sort of addicted to feeling and accumulating spiritual guides and psychic experiences and just having energy moving through my body and making my mind still and things that aren't really related to mindfulness practice. but were beautiful spiritual things to experience and explore. And I neglected, right, some of these really fundamental parts that I'm talking about because I was just so involved in the experience and I didn't realize or see, sort of how much bigger the ego was getting as a result because the mindfulness wasn't quite as strong. So I used to come to some of the temples, and when I'd have the opportunity, I would share my talents. I think, oh, people want to know that I can do this stuff, and right. And now often I just, sit as one of the kids in the back of the class, don't, sort of quietly have some abilities that some of you know about, and just sort of fades in the background, not interested in sharing it, don't care, being sort of kinder, more generous. And more helpful. And these things are just things that people have, I'm able to say now, not because I don't have humility, but because I'm teaching about this stuff and because people have complimented me about my character. I think something that I didn't realize was so important. I'm sure there's further to go. Okay, the next category that I have here is I called it removing your blind spots. I uh, I think that there is not just mindfulness, but some self-examination that a lot of us aren't willing to do and we neglect to do in our practice. It's to the detriment of us and to our practice. So I'm going to put these up, a couple of these here. Um, Truth over beliefs, meaning that a lot of us are very strong in our beliefs, whether they're beliefs because of our tradition or what we grew up in, and also some of the beliefs that we have accumulated over our adult life doing reading and research and that. And often we value our beliefs and our tradition and what we thought is right for a long time, right? The longevity of something that we've believed and how attached to it we are, how much it's branded on our consciousness, our beliefs. And when we enter spiritual teachings where it's all like we step into the unknown for us, right? In the sense of spiritual, not meaning religious, but just meaning in this case, like whatever I don't know that can be true, I would like to know the truth. And uh, we have to not let previous understandings or previous beliefs or belief systems that we were in taint our ability or taint our understanding of what happens because of actual truth that's being spoken to us or taught to us, or even experiences that happen. Because what happens is we end up looking, we see in it, we have an experience or we hear a teaching, and then we listen to it or we have the experience through the veil of what we already think. Right? And when we have it through the veil of what we already think, then we just take it as evidence uh, to like build up ourselves that what we originally thought is right. Right? Like we're looking for sort of evidence to pump ourselves up or puff ourselves up rather than seeing the truth as it is. I can give a very profound example. We all like profound stuff. So if you are, let's say, a devout Christian, right, and you're doing meditation, and then you see the light, now what? Right? You know, pardon me for being harsh, but like as a teacher, now I'm screwed. Because because it's like If you're a devout Christian and there's the light, you're done. There's Jesus. Like you won't even necessarily see Jesus, but in your mind, that's already Jesus. The second you see the light, right? So no matter what you might actually start to happen, or how far you might be able to be developed, because when you do practice and you see the light, or basically what happens is a sphere of light appears when you start becoming very concentrated. And this is well known long before uh, Christianity. It's even known long before Buddhism. It's known from thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago that when your concentration gets very subtle, but you're alert, right, that light starts appearing and it gets big and beautiful. And then in our for our practice, we're not supposed to go in and explore into the light, because then you get lost again, you lose yourself in other realms. But for those who don't have that training, you can go in and see heaven realms and see all kinds of lovely things, right? So when you go in with your belief system, whether you go in or just stop at the light, which isn't even extremely advanced, it's like intermediate to see the light, you could say, right? That it's like stop there, right? It coincides with my beliefs, so stop there, and then I get to believe what I believe. You see how that's dangerous when you're truly looking for, I just I just want to know what's real, you know. See how that's dangerous, having our own beliefs first. Okay? So we have to practice in the experience of in the in the interest of truth, of discovering what's really there. Okay, let me now turn it down a notch of depth and power and pleading to the religious. Although this is related to religious and political and these types of things too, is opinions are not truths, right? Do we all understand that? Are we sure? Because yeah, good. I saw Hannah like, I don't know, maybe yeah. Good. Right? Because I'm going to make a claim that in many cases, we are so addicted to our opinions, or our opinions are so ingrained, or we're so addicted to our thoughts that we don't even hear them. It's just me. We don't know that they're thoughts, right? It's just me and my experience. We don't actually know that a thought has come up, right? That we just believe whatever thought is there because we didn't see that it was a thought, right? So we often are just like, when we're not able to separate aggregates or see that a thought is a thought, right? We're not able to do that. Then it's just me and my opinions are the same thing. They're the same thing, right? So it becomes extremely difficult to actually recognize opinions as opinions. That I could give talks about be careful of your opinions. They can be hurtful. They're jading the truth and whatever. And people are like, oh yeah, no, I'm very careful with my opinions. But there might be some or a lot of opinions they don't even realize they're opinions because they're just so ingrained, right? If they're just, so it's sort of like no thoughts can be trusted. Like, for example, you might have opinions on certain political issues, right? If and see it branching out in two directions here. So in one direction, humility is important to understand that, you know what, I don't understand the entire situation. All I'm getting is news and reports and there are some people in my family that say, when I mention that, what channel were you watching when you said to me what you were saying, they will say something, oh no, I don't do that. I flip through Facebook and I get lots of different, opinions and stuff. Like, fair enough, but Facebook has algorithms where it goes in accordance with your views, and so it's not just that simple that you use social media now as well as just the TV, so now you're informed. you know you're not there and in it, and so no political opinion is correct. How about that? Why don't I say that? None of them are correct. There isn't any opinion that can encapsulate the entire truth of the situation. Right? But if you're able to see all sides with compassion, you're closer. You're closer to something called truth, right? Because if you're able to practice mindfulness and see the state of the human mind and how it's defiled, you start to see that the only thing that can actually help is less defilements and no defilements in the human mind, right? Other than that, there's inevitably problems and conflict. There has to be. In fact, that's part of why we're here. It's the world of, it's not heaven, right? So, as soon as one problem ends, even politically, another one's going to begin. It's not, this isn't the realm of peace. It's just not, right? So we have to take responsibility for our own minds in not being part of political opinions that and make it believing that the one that we have is right. We don't understand. There are forces involved in this stuff that are so far above than what we understand. And I mean even not just human hiding forces in the background. I mean non-human forces. So it's like we can't possibly know the whole picture. And so we can have opinions in a discussion, but we have to understand that you can't hold these and that you don't really know. You're just talking, just having a chat, but you don't really know. What's really going on is defilements. That's what's really going on. Is these are all when you turn on the TV and see what's going on, they're all your friends in suffering. You're seeing anger and delusion and jealousy and greed and frustration and misunderstanding and lonely people not knowing why they're here on this planet, trying to make a role. That's what you're seeing. Right? If you see it from that level, then you can't really, it becomes much harder to take sides. So your opinions are wrong, right? They're wrong on the big scale of things. They might be right to have a friendly debate, but in certain contexts, but only in certain contexts, not in the real context. We also have opinion here. Let me go even simpler. Yeah, that guy's a bad guy, right? So when we have an opinion like that guy's a bad guy, right? Sometimes we've had it for so long, we don't even see it as an opinion, right? We're just saying, yes, that guy is a bad guy. We don't see that that's an opinion. We're not paying attention that it's an opinion. We don't even think it's opinion. So no. That's just objectively true. That is a bad guy. Yeah. It's an opinion, right? You have to be able to see that there aren't any objective truths out in the world other than that's a physical form meeting the eye with opinions going on in the head, right? That's what's really going on, right? Anyway, hopefully that's valuable and not just provocative. Okay. But I assure you that it's just physical forms and then opinions and feelings coming up inside you. That's all it is. Okay, owning your role in negative situations. This is a big one. How many more hours are left so that I have to talk? Okay, only about 10, 15 minutes. What I'll say briefly about this one is uh, maybe understanding karma is the most important aspect of this, or at least having an idea that the great masters say that karma is real, right? And they wouldn't say that because they're lying, because they can't lie. They're incapable of lying. Their morality is so automatic that it's impossible to lie and deceive. Right? They're not working from a place where they have anything to gain because they've already reached the goal, or they just, or at least at minimum, they understand that all that's important is staying on the path of insight, and you have to be moral in order to stay on that path. So there isn't a genuine vipassana or insight teacher that is going to lead you astray intentionally in any way. because they can't. Right? And so like the fact that karma is real basically means that anything, so even the smallest thing that somebody says to you that is hurtful, right? Or say you say something even small that's hurtful to somebody, right? Either way, if you're the one saying the negative thing, that's bad karma, right? So even if they did something and it made you feel offended, and then you go, you should have whatever, right? Like that, right? That's your bad karma that you're putting out into the world, right? By making them feel bad or being, you know, confrontational or whatever, right? That's bad karma. You're feeling offended or something, you didn't see it, something popped out of your mouth, right? So that's your bad karma. It's going to have repercussions, right? So now somebody else is going to say something that makes you feel bad or makes you feel harmed, right? And that's inevitable. So anytime that somebody, even something as small, like we can extrapolate to the massive things like accidents and tragedies, but even the smallest thing, like somebody says something that is harsh to you or aimed at you, right? That's your karma, right? You have to own up to that, right? If let's say a friend lets you down in some way, right? First of all, that's just an opinion, right? They have the friend has a very complicated life and all their own reasons, and we should forgive them immediately and not say anything, right? However, you know, if we so if you feel like somebody lets you down, you have to understand that happened. That's your karma, right? It's a karmic result of something that you have done. Doesn't mean you had to do it to them, but you have put that energy out there, right? And it's returning to you. So a very neglected teaching that I see, even in our circles, is understanding that when things happen to you, it's just your karma. I mean, the things that you see and hear and that are there are just things resonating back or reflecting back, right? So when you do that, it becomes very hard to blame, doesn't it? You're going to start blaming people like what you said or what you did is what hurt me. It's no, it's your own actions in the past that hurt you. That's the sum total of it. So the neglected teaching there, right, is the neglected practice is the accepting responsibility. And so that's why the next one here is you don't necessarily have to apologize in person, but at least internally, it's the situation might call for an apology. If it's meant and really understood why you're apologizing, instead of a kid just said, "Hey, say you're sorry," not like that. Like, "Oh, Jess is saying say you're sorry, so you have to go say you're sorry." Not that. That's not what I'm saying, right? It's more about recognizing that. So moving further from just it being from it being your karma, but also being able to not just see things from your own perspective, but to be able to see things from the other people's perspective. That's part of loving kindness, part of metta, right? So if you're a metta practitioner, you don't just immediately blame people for things, but you see your contribution, not just karmically in the sense of, oh, I must have done something in the past, but also in this relationship, right? In this situation, have I made this person ever feel uncomfortable? Have I been confrontational? Have I called them out? Have I been mean? Have I been angry? Uh, have I been overbearing or anything? All of these contribute to how they might feel or their actions. And then also they have their own lives, so you and their own difficulties, and you don't know what happened to them that day. And right. So there's just so much and they have their own healing to do. And so there's just so much to forgive. There's just so much to forgive. And more than just forgive, it's more mature to understand your part in things than it is to forgive. Right. So forgiveness, I think, is not a neglected practice. It's a common among spiritual people. Forgiveness is I know I have to forgive because I have to heal from this. I don't want to hold grudges. So there's a knowing we need to forgive. I think there's what's neglected is realizing that forgiveness, like with mindfulness practitioners, should be automatic in the sense that you don't even mention that somebody might have hurt you or harmed you. You don't even mention that. You deal with that. You have to deal with your own um, misinterpretation of the situation, right? And meta and understanding where they might be coming from and their difficulties and things like that, right? So maybe the forgiveness is like the timeliness of the forgiveness, right? And then and then even further is the recognizing, being able to look at situations, and we tend to move outside and blame and think things are the other people's fault. Right? We just have a lot of us have an immediate reaction that somebody did something to me, right? And then you just have to the ability to look at the whole picture is a very mature thing to do, and and in fact, it's very immature when we can't do that. So actually, when I said I had some things percolating that made me make this talk, it actually was what is one of uh, boy, forgiveness is a common spiritual practice among spiritual practices. But what about taking blame and apologizing? I felt like that side is the neglected side. Right? That takes even more maturity. And so that's, I think, part of why the idea for this talk came up was that originally that idea. Okay, we only have about an hour and a half left. Okay. So what do I have here? Right, essential practices aren't glamorous. So these are some of the practices that we either, as teachers, teach less because they're not as, marketable in a sense. You're not going to want to do them or be excited to hear about them. Uh, and also, some of them are hard. They're hard to do. Okay. Seeing restlessness and boredom rather than doing something interesting, right? Guilty? Anybody guilty? That's right. Right? We'd rather just do something that sounds fun or interesting or a very pleasant distraction than actually see that we're suffering, right? And in most cases, there's a restlessness and agitation, a boredom. And the mindfulness practice is to see the restlessness, the boredom, or the agitation rather than just not even acknowledging it, not even knowing it's there. And, oh, I want to do this. Oh, I'm going to do that. Right? Whether it be in life, like, going to watch this or talk to that person or go do this, or in your meditation, like breathing, and then there's a boredom or restlessness that comes up, and it's like, oh, you know what? I'm going to try this practice. That sounds more fun, without just hang on, make sure you see that there's agitation there or restlessness there or boredom there, right? You want the constant desire uh, and obsession with things having to be fun and exciting and interesting, right? That's because we're suffering. Like the truth is that we're agitated and restless. If you weren't in the least agitated, restless, or bored, if you're able to conquer those things, then you don't need, like, these desires don't pop up that need this constant gratification. They don't come up, right? You're so much more free. I mean, this is a whole other talk, but just the fact that you think that you're free means you get to do whatever you want is another, maybe a topic for another day. That's just not freedom. It's slavery to desire and restlessness. Contemplating unexciting phenomena, right? Related, certainly. we have to take a look at some very, in a lot of cases, some things that originally seem very dull. And why would I do this? It's not exciting. It's not interesting, right? So I'll mention something actually very valuable was when if you pay attention to the body and you tend to be somebody that's dreamy and just sort of pictures your body rather than actually being able to feel it, that sometimes it's helpful to notice things like hardness in the physical. Can we sense some hardness or heaviness? Like feeling the body has weight and even like just the hardness, like there's like you might not be able to bring your attention in and sense actual bone and get real depictions of it. You can, but just at first glance, it's easier to maybe just sense that like maybe there's tension, right? And then rather than fixing the tension or having a problem with the tension, just noticing some areas there's tension, some areas there isn't tension, and how valuable of a practice that is, we don't even understand, right? And it just seems kind of dull. Like, okay, I'm going to pay attention to like hardness, sitting here, and softness, right? But it's actually, it helps to dismantle the imagery of me and my person, and we actually can have amazing experiences from it and understanding of what's actually really, really sitting here. But that's an example of a, unexciting phenomenon, and we often neglect to do some of these less exciting things that are actually extremely beneficial. Like another thing is noticing temperature in different areas of the body. Right? It's very helpful for a lot of people, the teaching, right? You can start to see that temperature, for example, like heat, isn't actually something that's part of the body exactly, but there's like the body and then there's temperature. And then when you notice hardness, softness, heat, and coolness in and around the body, you start to see that that's actually the body breaks down into those things, and that the body, the actual physical body, is some sort of an illusion, or like like a quantum jump into a bit of a delusion of what's here, and you just start seeing that all it really is movement and temperature and hardness and softness, and right, and sort of you get to move to a deeper level of truth. But often, I've mentioned it many times and take people through those meditations sometimes, but then often they end up neglected without me, signing up for the class and me forcing people into the exercise. Contemplating foulness. This is a big one. I see a lot of people like they want to turn off their camera when they're like, okay, no, Jess, don't teach about that stuff, But how about the idea, not an idea, the actual truth of the matter is, have you ever noticed that you might have a beautiful plate of food, right? And it looks lovely and wonderful, and maybe fine dining, it's well done, put a little piece of parsley on top of it to make it look all pretty for some reason. And then from there, you now put it in your mouth, right? Now, I've always said, even since I was a kid, which is kind of funny, when people say, "Oh, wow, this looks beautiful," my comment was, "Well, then put it in your eye." Right? Because the second that you take a bite, it's no longer beautiful, clearly, right? But we often do, like we don't think about that because we're not in the mouth chewing. We're in the idea of this is lovely what I'm having, you know? We're in that like we're in the idea, not in the actual situation that's going on, right? This very like mundane bones, like these teeth thing that are jetting out of the gums that are just crunching down on stuff. Like that's what's actually happening, making it smaller so it can go in, right? So there's movement, there's hardness, there's temperatures, right, that are going on. And then that stuff that goes in, which was all nice and beautiful, what happens to that stuff once it enters this? Right? What happens to anything? What happens to water? Oh, this is beautiful. This water is filled with minerals. This water is nice from the French, from France or whatever, springs, you know. What happens to it the second it goes inside? Right? All this stuff ends up becoming excrement, sweat and urine, feces, and so so what does that say about our body? When beautiful things come in, terrible things come out. What does that say about what's going on in here, right? It's putrid. Right? It's absolutely putrid, inside, not as an objective ultimate, not as an ultimate truth, but as a more realistic reading or viewing of what's actually going on here with the physical form, and just to see how much we're in a dreamland. But what's actually here is it's like a factory for producing smelly, dirty excrement. Right? That's what's happening. What comes out of the eyes and out of the ears and out of the nose and out of the mouth and out of all the other holes? It's all right. That's what's really going on here. But we distract ourselves like, oh, this is wonderful. That's great. Did you this? Did you that? And what's really here is neglected, is ignored, and that's the truth is that it's foul, right? You can bring your attention into the body, and if your concentration is strong enough, you can see the intestines moving. They move by there's like a squeeze and it pushes stuff, and then a squeeze and it pushes stuff. A little bit like you watch a worm, the way that it moves. And that's what's really going as we're sitting here, this is what's going on. Right. Anyway, you can understand why a lot of people neglect to practice these valuable things and teach these things. Come to my foulness course, only $250 a person, right? We want to grow the mindfulness society to have more people learning, right? It's a little tough to talk about these things for an hour and then have people arrive next week. All right, we're running out of time, but we're getting to the end here. Contemplating death, right? This is something that a lot of people aren't comfortable with. The one absolute certainty once we are born, right? There's only one, right? Because all other things can change and fail and, in a moment's notice, as we have seen in tragedies. And things can all change. This one is absolutely certain, right? And we just don't consider it or think about it enough. We don't meditate on it enough. Certainly, it deserves an entire lecture. But we have to become comfortable with the idea of death as a mindfulness practitioner. There's no doubt about it. In fact, as we practice more and more, death becomes less and less of a concern. And then my last point is that liberation isn't sexy, I wrote, and that's to remind me of something. And it requires discipline and sacrifice. So we don't often talk about how much work and hard work is required, and the sacrifice that's required too, because you have to give up things, right? And time devoted to things that were not helpful, not beneficial, and actually encouraged defilements of mind and impurities of mind rather than help to refine our mind, right? So there's sacrifice involved, right? We might have been in, we might end up, sort of gently removing ourselves from certain groups of people or friends, right, that aren't helpful and contribute in a negative way to our experience and to our practice. So there's sacrifice in many ways. Those are just a couple examples, but sacrifice involved, and certainly requires a tremendous amount of discipline and practicing every day. And so I feel like some of the discipline required and sacrifice required aren't talked about enough. And then the reason I wrote that it isn't sexy, well, it's partly about the glamorous idea, but because there are truths in liberation that a lot of people don't talk about because it just doesn't make sense from our point of view. Why would this be good? Because we're after fun and excitement. And so I can tell you something, for example, that the enlightened beings that have completely released all attachment to the world, right? They have no more sexual feelings and no more sexual interest. And their body, even after just a short time, responds and all their sexual hormones disappear. Men aren't able to perform and aren't interested in performing. There's no semen being generated anymore. This is actually true and verified and documented, which is like beyond worldly and beyond scientific understanding, but it's absolutely true, even physical manifestation. It's actually lust and desire that are they bring up all the mental fabrications that put us in that state that are able to sustain any sexual desire. So all this, once those desires are completely eliminated, even physically, it's completely eliminated. They're no longer human in an energetic sense, just still the remnants of being a human uh, from being born one. Right? So, absolutely fascinating stuff, hard to even believe or understand, but it's actually true about uh, some monks that you could even see and visit in Thailand. They appear as a man, but they're not really a man per se anymore. They're just well, I don't even want to say a being. They're just, they're they've crossed over to the other side, let's say. Okay. Sorry for going a little bit over time, but certainly a lot to discuss. I'm sure over the years I've already had and will have longer talks about some of the specific points that I went through today. And let me unmute Jen so she can take over from here and talk about what's coming up. Hi, Jen.
Hey, thanks so much, Jess. Great topics today. I feel like there's lots that I would love to hear you speak about. So if there's anything that resonated with people that you want Jess to maybe have a whole talk on, feel free to reach out. Maybe we can convince Jess to dedicate an hour to something specific. But in the interim, we are back again next Sunday, July 12th at 8 p.m. The wonderful Salima will be speaking about spiritual friendship as a foundation to our practice. And much like the necessity of the Mindfulness Society and having this community here that brings us together weekly, how much support our spiritual friendship with each other and making time for those people in our lives helps to further our development. She'll get into a lot of the specifics, but part of the reason why we're here is that spiritual friendship and community. So please join us next Sunday to continue to learn about why we're doing what we're doing and why we're here together and how it helps us develop. And until then, we will see everyone in a week's time. Thank you again, Jess. He dropped in a message there. Make sure you check the chat for Jess. And we will see everyone next Sunday.